The fractured crown, a billionaire's betrayal, a pregnant wife's escape, and the echoes of a lie. The Gilded Overture, a love forged in starlight. As Elara Vance stared at the cold hard proof of her husband's betrayal, her mind, a shattered kaleidoscope, desperately reeled back, searching for the first hairline crack in the gilded cage she had mistaken for a fairy tale. How could it have come to this? It felt like only yesterday, yet also a lifetime ago, that her world was a symphony of intoxicating joy, a breathtaking overture orchestrated by the very man who now threatened its foundations, Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne. The name itself seemed to command attention, to radiate power. He had swept into Elara Vance's life like a dazzling meteor, promising a universe of love. She never suspected, not for a moment, that his brilliant light cast the darkest, most consuming shadows. Their first encounter was pure Viridia City serendipity, or so she'd believed. It was at the annual Starlight Foundation Gala, a glittering affair where the city's elite preened and paraded. Elara, then a rising curator with more passion than connections, had found herself mesmerized by a delicate antique silver locket, its filigree work exquisite, displayed for auction. She'd known, with a pang, it was far beyond her reach. Then Julian Thorne, a man whose presence seemed to suck the air from the room, had entered the bidding. His voice, calm yet resonant, had cut through the polite murmurings, each bid eclipsing the last until the locket was his. Elara had watched, a blush rising on her cheeks as he then approached her, the locket nestled in his palm. A beautiful piece, he'd said, his eyes the color of warm whiskey, locking onto hers, but it would find its true home gracing the neck of someone who truly appreciates its artistry. And just like that, he'd gifted it to her, a gesture so grand, so unexpected, it had left her breathless. What followed was a romance plucked from the pages of a storybook. A whirlwind of opulence and adoration. Lavish dates materialized as if by magic, private jets whisking them away to moonlit dinners on secluded beaches, front-row seats at every coveted show, quiet evenings in his penthouse overlooking the glittering expanse of Viridia City, where he'd play the piano, his music weaving a spell around her heart. Julian's charm was captivating, a potent elixir that Elara drank willingly. He made her feel like the only woman in the world, his adoration seemingly profound, his focus entirely hers. He listened, truly listened, or so it seemed, to her dreams, her fears, her quiet observations about art and life. He made her laugh, a deep, genuine laugh she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Their wedding at Siren's Cove was a spectacle that Viridia City society talked about for months. Imagine a cliffside villa, the sun setting over an azure ocean, casting everything in a golden glow. Thousands of white orchids, Elara's favorite, cascaded from every archway. The guest list was a who's who of international power brokers and society swans. Elara, in a gown that seemed spun from moonlight, had felt like a queen. Nat, her love story, a testament to fairy tales coming true. Julian, devastatingly handsome in his bespoke suit, had looked at her with an intensity that melted her very soul. Their vows, whispered against the rhythmic crash of the waves, had promised forever. Yes, it was a display of breathtaking wealth, an almost obscene level of opulence. But beneath the glitter, Elara had felt a current of what she believed was deep, unshakable love. Life in their Onyx Estates mansion, a sprawling architectural marvel of glass and stone nestled in the most exclusive enclave of Viridia City, continued the illusion of a modern fairy tale. Days were filled with sun-drenched mornings by the infinity pool, intimate dinners prepared by their private chef, and the quiet hum of a life perfectly curated. Julian was generous, attentive, always anticipating her needs before she even voiced them. He was her rock, her confidant, her everything. Yet even then, in those early days of wedded bliss, there were fleeting moments, tiny dissonant notes in their perfect symphony, that Elara, blinded by love and the sheer momentum of their romance, had dismissed or reinterpreted. Julian's ambition, the fierce, almost brutal drive that had built his empire, sometimes manifested in ways that, had she been less enthralled, might have given her pause. She remembered one afternoon, curled on a chaise lounge in his sun-filled study, idly sketching. Julian was on a conference call. His voice, usually so warm when speaking to her, now had a chilling edge, a steely precision as he discussed a hostile takeover. "Crush them," he'd said, his tone devoid of emotion. "No survivors. I want their flagship assets by Monday." The words had sent a shiver down her spine, but when he'd hung up and turned to her, his eyes were once again soft, his smile enveloping. "Just business, my love," he'd murmured, kissing her forehead. "Sometimes you have to be ruthless to protect what's yours." And Elara, wanting so desperately to believe in his inherent goodness, had accepted his explanation, mistaking this chill incapacity for fierce ambition, a necessary evil in his high-stakes world. He was a titan, after all, and titans sometimes had to make difficult choices. She was his partner, his collaborator in this grand adventure of life, or so he often told her. He even confided in her about new ventures, new acquisitions, making her feel valued, an integral part of his world. It was during these early heady months of marriage, perhaps a housewarming gift for their Onyx Estates palace, that Julian presented Elara with a small, exquisite, antique music box. It was ebony, inlaid with mother of pearl, and when she opened it, a hauntingly beautiful melody filled the air. Tucked inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a single glossy raven feather. It was perfect, almost unnaturally so. "Our unique luck charm, Elara," Julian had whispered, his voice husky against her ear. "A symbol of our extraordinary destiny together. Ravens are wise, you know, and fiercely protective." Elara had found it enchanting, this strange, beautiful token. The feather was undeniably striking, its blackness so deep it seemed to absorb the light. She'd carefully placed it back in the music box, a secret treasure, a symbol of their unique bond. She hadn't questioned its origin, nor had she attached any deeper meaning to it beyond his romantic explanation. Why would she? Her world was one of starlight and roses, of a love story so potent it felt preordained. And so their love story, this grand gilded overture, reached its crescendo. Elara lived in a cocoon of perceived perfection, every day a testament to Julian's love and their shared happiness. She was Mrs. Julian Thorne, envied by many, cherished, she believed, by one. Looking at the raven feather from time to time, tracing its smooth, cool surface, she would smile, thinking it symbolized the unique, almost magical connection they shared, a tangible piece of their extraordinary romance. She was blissfully, dangerously unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, a tempest whose first violent winds were already beginning to howl, threatening to rip her perfect world, and the man she loved, apart. Her innocent joy, symbolized by that single raven feather, was a fragile thing, so very fragile, soon to be tested by insidious whispers and chilling doubts that would creep into her heart like the coldest Viridia city fog. Her innocent joy, symbolized by that single raven feather, was a fragile thing, so very fragile, soon to be tested by insidious whispers and chilling doubts that would creep into her heart like the coldest Viridia city fog. But even in paradise, shadows begin to lengthen, often starting with the most joyous news, news that should, by all accounts, draw two souls even closer. The two blue lines on the pregnancy test, stark against the white plastic, promised a new chapter of joy, a deepening of the love she shared with Julian. But instead they marked the page where Elara's fairy tale began to unravel with unnerving speed. She remembered the moment she told Julian, her heart thrumming with a mixture of euphoria and trepidation. They were in the sun-drenched conservatory of their Onyx Estates home, surrounded by blooming orchids. She'd presented him with a tiny, exquisitely wrapped gift, a pair of silver baby shoes. His reaction at first was everything she'd dreamed of. His eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face before he let out a whoop of delight, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around until she was dizzy with laughter and relief. "A baby, Elara, our baby," he'd exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. This is everything." He'd talked excitedly about names, about converting one of the sprawling guest wings into a nursery fit for royalty, about teaching their child to sail on their yacht. For a few precious weeks, the dream held. But soon, almost imperceptibly at first, a chill began to seep into their warm cocoon. Julian became increasingly distant. His business trips, always a feature of his high-powered life, grew more frequent, their destinations more vaguely explained. "Just tying up some loose ends in Ethelbert," he'd say, or "a quick jaunt to Monte Carlo, darling, can't be helped." The calls became more secretive. He'd often step out onto the terrace, his voice a low murmur, his back to her. Sometimes, when he returned late from these meetings, she'd catch the faint, lingering scent of an unknown exotic perfume, something heavy and musky, so unlike her own light floral fragrances. It wasn't just one scent, but a subtle rotation, as if he moved through a garden of different forbidden blooms. Elara, hormonal and exquisitely sensitive in her early pregnancy, tried to dismiss her growing unease. Julian was a magnate, a man with a global empire. Of course, his life was demanding. Of course, he met with countless people. She chided herself for her insecurity, for the tendrils of suspicion that curled around her heart. Yet the small signs accumulated, like tiny, sharp stones in her shoe. The way his eyes would sometimes flick away from hers when she asked about his day. The new, password-protected laptop he kept locked in his study. The sudden, expensive gifts, a diamond bracelet one week, a vintage designer handbag the next, that felt less like tokens of affection and more like distractions? Or perhaps guilt offerings. The unease solidified into a cold dread at the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala, one of the premier events in the Diamond Heights social calendar. The Sterlings were old money, their influence woven into the very fabric of Viridia City. Elara, now noticeably pregnant in an empire waist gown of shimmering amethyst silk, felt a pang of loneliness as she navigated the glittering ballroom alone. Julian had called at the last minute, full of apologies. A critical deal in Hong Kong had blown up. He needed to handle it personally. "You'll be the belle of the ball without me, my love," he'd said, his voice sounding strained over the satellite link. As she sipped a glass of sparkling water near a towering ice sculpture, she overheard a fragment of a hushed, venomous conversation between two impeccably dressed women, their faces obscured by elaborate feathered masks. Their voices were like shards of glass. "Julian Thorne, can you believe it? And with her of all people," one hissed. The other tittered. "Oh, darling, Serafina Dubois gets whatever or whoever she wants. It's a very private, very expensive arrangement, I hear. Has been for months." Poor Elara, blissfully unaware, I suppose, with the baby and all. Just then, one of the women glanced over her shoulder, her eyes, cold and assessing, meeting Elara's. Their chatter abruptly ceased, replaced by an awkward, suffocating silence. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. Serafina Dubois. The name meant nothing to her, yet it echoed in her mind with a sinister resonance. Later that evening, Bianca Sterling, the perfectly coiffed and glacially beautiful matriarch of the Sterling clan, a woman whose social rivalry with anyone perceived as a threat was legendary, glided towards Elara, her smile as fixed and brilliant as the diamonds at her throat. "Darling Elara, you're simply glowing," Bianca purred, her eyes flicking dismissively over Elara's burgeoning stomach. "Pregnancy suits you. Though," she paused, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "it can make one rather unobservant of a husband's, shall we say, extracurricular passions, can't it? Men like Julian, they have such appetites." She patted Elara's arm, a gesture that felt more like a viper's strike. "Just a little friendly advice, dear. Keep your eyes open." Elara was deeply unsettled. Bianca's words, coated in saccharine sympathy, were undeniably malicious, yet they resonated with the whispers she'd overheard, with the gnawing doubts she tried so hard to suppress. Back in the sterile opulence of their Onyx Estates bedroom, the antique music box Julian had given her sat on her dressing table. She opened it, the haunting melody filling the silence. The raven feather lay within, its blackness seeming deeper, more menacing than before. Did it mock her now? This supposed luck charm? When Julian returned a few days later, all apologies and protestations of missing her terribly, Elara finally confronted him, not with the whispers, not with Bianca's venom. She couldn't bring herself to repeat those, but with his distance, his secrecy. "Julian, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. "You seem so far away. Are you unhappy? Is it me? The baby?" He was a master of emotional manipulation. He feigned shock, then hurt, then a deep, sorrowful understanding. He pulled her into his arms, stroking her hair, his voice a soothing balm. "Oh, Elara, my love, my sensitive Elara. How could you even think such things?" He blamed the stress of his business, the immense pressure he was under. He blamed her pregnancy hormones, suggesting gently that perhaps she was being overly emotional, imagining things. "You and this baby," he murmured, kissing her temple. "You are my entire world, my only world. There's no one else. There never could be." He was so convincing, his eyes filled with such apparent sincerity that she almost believed him. Almost. He then presented her with another gift, an absurdly expensive diamond necklace, its brilliance almost blinding. "A little something to show you how much I adore you," he'd said, fastening it around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin. It felt heavy, like a beautiful, glittering manacle. She let him reassure her, let his words and the sheer force of his personality wash over her doubts. But as she lay in bed that night, the cold diamonds pressing against her throat, a tiny, persistent voice in the deepest part of her whispered that his performance had been too polished, his denials too smooth. The raven feather in its box seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the name Serafina was now etched into her mind, a brand of pure, unadulterated suspicion. Julian's reassurances now echoed hollowly in her mind. The gnawing doubt had become a hunger for certainty, a perilous path she knew, with a chilling premonition, she would soon have to tread, regardless of where it might lead. Julian's smooth denials and expensive gifts, those glittering diamonds that felt so cold against her skin, were no longer enough to silence the alarm bells clanging incessantly in Elara's heart. The seeds of doubt, once sown by poisonous whispers and Julian's own increasingly erratic behavior, had sprouted into a terrifying certainty, a conviction that Elara could no longer ignore. She needed irrefutable truth, no matter how devastating that truth might be. The gnawing doubt had become a hunger for certainty, a perilous path she knew, with a chilling sense of foreboding, she had to tread. "Some doors are best left unopened, Mrs. Thorne," the gravel-voiced private investigator Marcus Rourke had warned, his eyes chips of weathered granite, studying her with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Ignorance can be a sanctuary, especially in a city like Viridia." But Elara knew the truth, however monstrous, was the only key to her sanity, the only way to silence the maddening chorus of suspicion that had become the soundtrack to her days and nights. Tormented by Julian's increasingly hollow reassurances and the chilling echo of the name Serafina, Elara had secretly contacted Rourke. His office, tucked away in a nondescript building on the grittier industrial side of Viridia City, was a world away from the polished opulence of Onyx Estates. It smelled of stale coffee, old files, and unspoken desperation. Marcus Rourke himself was a man etched by time and the city's underbelly, discreet, world-weary, and, Elara sensed, incorruptible. He specialized in uncovering the secrets the wealthy and powerful fought so hard to conceal. Initially, Rourke had been hesitant. "Rich man, beautiful wife, another woman," he'd said, leaning back in his worn leather chair, his gaze unwavering. It's a tale as old as time, Mrs. Thorne, and it rarely ends well. Are you sure you want to pull at this thread? Sometimes the whole tapestry unravels." His words were a stark warning, a final chance to retreat into the gilded cage of blissful ignorance. But Elara, her hand instinctively resting on her burgeoning belly, had met his gaze with a quiet desperation that transcended her fear. "I need to know, Mr. Rourke," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible. "For myself and for my child." Perhaps it was her visible pregnancy, the vulnerability in her eyes, or simply the weary resignation of a man who had seen too much deceit, but Rourke had nodded slowly. "All right, Mrs. Thorne, I'll look into it. But be prepared. The truth in Viridia City often wears a very ugly mask." The weeks that followed were an agony of tense waiting for Elara. Every ring of the phone, every unexpected knock at the door sent her heart leaping into her throat. She tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, attending prenatal appointments, overseeing the decoration of the nursery, even enduring Julian's increasingly strained attempts at affection. But beneath the surface, she was a wreck, living on a knife edge of anxiety. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams filled with shadowy figures and the haunting melody of the raven feather music box. Finally, the call came. "I have something for you, Mrs. Thorne," Rourke's voice, devoid of inflection, had said. "Can you meet me?" They met at a quiet, anonymous cafe overlooking the Coral Bay boardwalk, the cheerful cries of children and the distant roar of the ocean, a jarring contrast to the grim business at hand. Rourke slid a sleek, gunmetal gray dossier across the table. It landed with a soft thud that seemed to reverberate through Elara's entire being. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The contents were irrefutable, a cold, hard litany of Julian's betrayal. Page after page detailed his secret life with a precision that was both horrifying and, in a strange way, validating. There were photographs, glossy and damning. Julian, her Julian, his arm draped possessively around the waist of a striking, enigmatic woman with eyes like black diamonds and hair like spun obsidian. This, then, was Serafina Dubois. She was undeniably beautiful, exuding an aura of dangerous allure and ruthless confidence. They were pictured leaving a discreet, achingly chic restaurant in the Ember district, their heads close together, laughing intimately. Another series of photos showed them entering a luxurious, unlisted penthouse apartment in Zenith Plaza, the city's newest, most exclusive high-rise, late at night, and leaving, disheveled but smiling, in the early hours of the morning. There were financial records, too, meticulously compiled, copies of lease agreements for the Zenith Plaza apartment, all paid from an offshore account in Julian's name. Receipts for lavish gifts, jewelry that made Elara's own diamond necklace seem like a trinket, couture gowns, first-class tickets to exotic destinations she had never been invited to. It was a systematic, calculated deception. One photograph in particular made Elara's blood run cold. It was a close-up of Serafina Dubois, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips as she exited the Zenith Plaza apartment. And there, on the ornate heavy oak door behind her, almost hidden in the shadows of the elaborate carving, was a small, stylized raven, its wings spread as if in flight. The sight of it, so eerily similar to the feather Julian had given her, sent an icy shiver down Elara's spine. It couldn't be a coincidence. This was something more, something sinister. Rourke's notes accompanying the dossier were terse but chilling. Serafina Dubois, he'd written, was more than just a beautiful mistress. She was a notorious international art dealer, whispered to have deep connections to the city's underworld, a key player in the shadowy, high-stakes game of illicit art and antiquities trafficking. There were rumors of her ruthlessness, of fortunes made and lives ruined in her wake. She was, in short, a very dangerous woman to be entangled with. Why would Julian, a legitimate, powerful businessman, be involved with someone like her? Unless his own empire wasn't as legitimate as she'd always believed. The weight of the truth was crushing, a physical blow that stole the air from Elara's lungs. This wasn't just a sordid affair. It was a betrayal that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about her husband, about their life, about the very foundations of her world. The dossier lay heavy in her hands, each page a nail in the coffin of her marriage, each photograph a testament to Julian's lies. The image of the fairy-tale husband, the adoring partner, the man she had loved with all her heart, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The truth, in all its devastating ugliness, was now undeniable. The only thing left was to face the architect of her pain, the man who had so casually, so cruelly destroyed her world. And as she sat there, the sounds of the boardwalk fading into a dull roar in her ears, her gaze fell upon a particularly damning photo. Julian and Serafina, their lips locked in a passionate kiss outside that Ember District restaurant. And there, in the foreground, artfully placed on the table beside them, was a crystal paperweight, identical to the raven feather one on Julian's desk in their Onyx Estate study. It was as if the universe itself was screaming at her, linking Julian directly to this wider, more dangerous world that Serafina inhabited. A world of secrets, lies, and, Elara now feared, unimaginable peril. The cold, hard evidence clutched in Elara's trembling hands was a weapon, yes, but also a death sentence for the life she had so naively cherished. Now, armed with the devastating truth, the image of her fairy-tale husband irrevocably shattered, Elara prepared for the most painful confrontation of her life. There was no turning back. The only path forward was through the inferno of Julian's lies. His charming smile, the one that had always managed to disarm her, faltered. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The mask cracked, revealing the cold, calculating manipulator beneath as Elara, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor that racked her body, laid down the first photograph on the polished mahogany expanse of his Onyx Estate study desk. It was the one of Julian and Serafina Dubois, their lips locked in a passionate embrace outside that trendy Ember District restaurant. "Explain this, Julian." Her words were quiet, yet they sliced through the opulent silence of the room like a shard of ice. Julian stared at the photograph, his whiskey-colored eyes widening almost imperceptibly. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked, like a child caught with his hand deep in the cookie jar. Then, the practiced composure slid back into place. "Elara, darling," he began, his voice smooth as silk, attempting his usual charismatic denial. "What is this? Some sort of joke? You know how people in this city love to gossip, to fabricate drama." He even managed a dismissive chuckle. But Elara stood firm, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, the baby within her a silent, vulnerable witness to this unfolding tragedy. She laid down another photograph, then another. Julian with Serafina entering the Zenith Plaza apartment building, his arm possessively around her waist. Serafina, draped in furs and jewels, laughing up at him, her eyes glittering with a predatory light. The lease agreements, the receipts for extravagant gifts. "It's not a joke, Julian," Elara said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a rising tide of anger and betrayal. "It's your life, your other life." She gestured towards the damning evidence spread between them, a collage of his duplicity. "Who is she? Who is Serafina Dubois?" Julian's composure finally shattered. The charming facade crumbled, revealing a flicker of something akin to panic in his eyes before it was quickly masked by a new strategy. He shifted tactics, his voice now laced with a carefully calibrated remorse. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his expression one of profound regret. "Elara, my love, I can't explain." He sank into his leather armchair, the picture of a broken man. Calculated apologies spilled from his lips, a torrent of excuses, blaming the stress of his empire, the loneliness of his business trips, the undeniable, dangerous allure of Serafina. "She meant nothing, Elara, I swear it," he pleaded, his eyes searching hers, desperate for a sign of forgiveness. "A mistake. A terrible, foolish mistake. You and the baby, you're my world. My only world. Please, Elara, you have to believe me." A part of her, the part that still clung to the memory of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had promised her forever, desperately wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to. The thought of their life, their future, their unborn child, all of it crumbling to dust, was unbearable. Was it possible? Could this all be a monstrous mistake, a temporary lapse in judgment? He was so convincing, his pleas so heartfelt, his remorse seemingly so genuine. After what felt like an eternity of tears, accusations, and increasingly desperate promises from Julian, a tense, fragile truce was established. He swore he would end it with Serafina immediately, that he would do anything to earn back Elara's trust. He would go to therapy. They would go to therapy together. He would prove his devotion. For a few days, an uneasy peace settled over the Onyx Estates mansion. Julian was overly attentive, showering Elara with affection, constantly seeking her reassurance. He canceled his upcoming trips, spent his evenings at home, even began discussing baby names with a renewed, almost frantic enthusiasm. Elara, emotionally exhausted and clinging to a sliver of hope, allowed herself to be lulled into a state of cautious optimism. Perhaps they could get through this. But the image of Serafina Dubois, her predatory smile, the carved raven on her apartment door, haunted Elara's waking hours and her dreams. The PI's warnings about Serafina's dangerous reputation, her rumored involvement in illicit art dealings echoed in her mind. Something still felt terribly wrong. The pieces didn't quite fit. If it was just a meaningless fling, why the secrecy? Why the expensive apartment? Why the whispers of danger surrounding this woman? Days later, still deeply unsettled, driven by a nameless dread she couldn't shake, Elara found herself in Julian's study. He was out for a brief meeting, he'd said, kissing her with an almost desperate fervor before he left. The room, usually a symbol of his power and success, now felt cold, menacing. Her eyes scanned the meticulously organized shelves, the polished surfaces. What was she looking for? She didn't even know. And then she saw it. Tucked away beneath a stack of financial reports in a rarely used desk drawer, almost hidden from view, was a sleek, anonymous burner phone. Her heart sank. With trembling fingers, she powered it on. The message history was a fresh stab to her already wounded heart. Recent, intimate messages between Julian and Serafina. Far from ending it, their communication was ongoing, filled with shared secrets and a chillingly casual intimacy. But it was more than just the words of lovers. The messages revealed a much deeper, far more manipulative connection than a mere fling. Serafina seemed to exert a strange, almost hypnotic control over Julian. There were references to our mutual interests, the upcoming shipment from Antwerp, and keeping the investors satisfied. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else. Something dark. Something dangerous. One particular message from Serafina, sent just the previous night, chilled Elara to the bone, freezing the very marrow in her bones. It read, "Don't forget who holds the strings, Julian. And don't disappoint our associates. The ravens always collect their due." Ravens, the raven feather he'd given her, the carved raven on Serafina's door. A casual, ominous reference in the text. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Julian's remorse, his promises, his desperate pleas, it had all been another performance, another layer in his intricate web of lies. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was complex, dangerous, and far-reaching. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was entangled in something that could destroy them all. The full, terrifying extent of Julian's duplicity and Serafina Dubois's ominous, controlling influence crashed down upon Elara with the force of a physical blow. The cold metal of the burner phone felt like a brand against her skin, searing the truth of his compounded betrayal into her very soul. The charade was over. Any lingering hope she might have harbored for their future, for the man she thought she knew, turned to ash in her mouth. This time, there would be no truce, no second chances, only the chilling realization of the abyss that had opened up beneath her feet. The cold metal of the burner phone felt like a brand against Elara's skin, searing the truth of his compounded betrayal, his ongoing betrayal, into her very soul. Any lingering hope she might have harbored for their future, for the man she thought she knew, the man she still, despite everything, loved with a fierceness that terrified her, turned to ash in her mouth. His apologies, his promises, his desperate pleas, all of it, another masterful performance. The charade was well and truly over. This time there would be no truce, no second chances, no more agonizing nights spent wondering if she was the one going mad. Only escape. With the chilling words from Serafina Dubois' text message, "Don't forget who holds the strings, Julian. The ravens always collect their due," echoing like a death knell in her mind, Elara knew her gilded cage, the opulent Onyx Estates mansion, had become a trap. Escape was no longer a choice. It was a desperate, primal necessity. She wouldn't expose her unborn child, her precious Leo, to this dangerous, duplicitous life. To a world populated by shadowy figures like Serafina and governed by cryptic threats involving ravens and their due. What did it all mean? She didn't know, and a cold dread assured her she didn't want to find out. Not while she carried Julian's son. The final, irrefutable betrayal galvanized Elara. The shock gave way to a cold, hard resolve. Her mind, once a whirlwind of confusion and heartbreak, now focused with a laser-like intensity on a single objective: getting out. She had to be smart. She had to be meticulous. Julian was powerful, resourceful, and, she now understood, utterly ruthless when his interests were threatened. She couldn't afford a single misstep. Her loyal friend, Chloe Asher, was her only confidant, her lifeline in this terrifying new reality. Chloe, pragmatic and fiercely protective, had been her rock ever since Elara had tearfully confessed her initial suspicions. Now, contacted via a new, untraceable prepaid phone Elara had purchased with cash, Chloe listened in stunned silence as Elara recounted the discovery of the burner phone and Serafina's ominous message. There were no "I told you so's," no recriminations, only unwavering support and a quiet determination to help Elara and Leo find safety. "Okay," Chloe had said, her voice firm despite the gravity of the situation. "Okay, Elara, we do this. Tell me what you need." The next 24 hours were a blur of clandestine planning. Elara moved through the opulent rooms of the Onyx Estates mansion like a ghost, her every action measured, her expression carefully neutral whenever Julian was present. He seemed oblivious, still playing the part of the remorseful husband, a role he inhabited with chilling perfection. He'd bring her breakfast in bed, his eyes filled with feigned tenderness. He'd talk about their future, about the baby, his voice laced with a sincerity that made her stomach churn. How could he be so adept at deceit? Had their entire relationship been a lie? The thought was a fresh stab of pain, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. The escape was planned for the following evening, when Julian was scheduled to attend a high-profile investors' dinner across town, an event he couldn't possibly miss, not with the Antwerp shipment and satisfied investors. Serafina had mentioned, likely on the agenda. Chloe would pick her up at a discreet service entrance at precisely 9 p.m. Elara had only a few hours to pack, to sever the ties to the life she had once believed was her destiny. The scene in their master suite was one of quiet, desperate tension. Elara packed a single, nondescript duffel bag with essentials, a few changes of clothes, her prenatal vitamins, the small amount of emergency cash she'd managed to squirrel away, copies of her medical records. Her hands shook so violently she could barely fasten the clasps on her toiletries bag. She paused by the doorway to the nursery they had started planning, her heart aching. The walls were painted a soft, gender-neutral yellow, a whimsical mural of woodland creatures just begun on one wall. A beautiful, handcrafted crib, a gift from Julian's estranged mother, stood in the center of the room, waiting for an occupant it might now never know. Tears streamed down Elara's face as she allowed herself a moment of raw, unadulterated grief for the future that had been stolen from her, from Leo. With a shuddering breath, she forced herself back to the present. She took the antique music box Julian had given her, the one with the single glossy raven feather nestled inside. It felt cold, ominous in her hand now, no longer a symbol of unique luck, but of something far darker. She hesitated, then tucked it deep into the duffel bag. A reminder? A clue? She didn't know. But she couldn't leave it behind. The expensive diamond necklace Julian had gifted her after her first tentative confrontation, however, she left lying on her dressing table, its brilliance a mocking counterpoint to the darkness that had enveloped her life. It was a bribe, a beautiful lie, and she wanted no part of it. Her final act was to write the note. Her hand, surprisingly steady now, moved across heavy cream-colored Onyx Estates stationery. "Julian," she wrote, her words short, cryptic, infused with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical wound. "The illusion is shattered. I choose truth for myself and for Leo. You'll understand when the ravens come home to roost." She didn't sign it. He would know. She placed the note on their marital bed, the vast, empty space a stark reminder of the chasm that had opened between them. And on top of the note she laid her wedding ring, a magnificent 10-carat diamond, a symbol of their supposedly unbreakable bond. Now it felt like a shackle, a brand. She slipped it from her finger, the coolness of the metal a final, chilling farewell. At precisely 8:58 p.m., Elara, a lone suitcase in hand, slipped out of the service entrance at the rear of the Onyx Estates mansion. The Viridia City night was cool, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and unspoken secrets. Chloe was there, as promised, her small, unassuming sedan blending into the shadows. Elara slid into the passenger seat, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Ready?" Chloe asked, her voice soft but steady. Elara could only nod, her throat tight with unshed tears. As they drove away, leaving the opulent, glittering prison of Onyx Estates behind them, Elara took one last look at the mansion, a monument to their broken dreams, its windows blazing with a cold, indifferent light. And then something caught her eye. A single, glossy black raven feather, identical to the one in her music box, drifted down from the inky sky, seemingly out of nowhere. It landed, for a fleeting second, on the windshield of Chloe's car, directly in Elara's line of sight, before being swept away by the wind. Elara shivered, a profound sense of unease washing over her. Was it an omen? A warning? A sign that the shadows of Julian's world, the world of Serafina and the ravens, would not be so easily escaped? She clutched her belly, a fierce protective love for her unborn son, her Leo, surging through her. "I will protect you," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken vow against the darkness of the Viridia City night. "No matter what, I will keep you safe." With that silent promise, Elara Vance, or rather, the woman who would soon become Lena Kaspar, vanished into the anonymity of the sprawling metropolis, her destination the small coastal town of Silverstrand, a place where she prayed she and her son could finally find peace. A place where the ravens, hopefully, would not follow. The car carrying Elara disappeared into the anonymity of the highway, leaving behind a void that was about to consume its architect. The car carrying Elara disappeared into the anonymity of the highway. a small, insignificant vehicle swallowed by the sprawling, indifferent lights of Viridia City. It left behind a void, a gaping wound in the heart of the Onyx Estates mansion, a void that was about to consume its architect, Julian Thorne. While Elara fought for a new dawn, a fragile hope for herself and her unborn child, in the quiet anonymity of Silverstrand, Julian Thorne, the master of his universe, was about to step into his personal midnight, a reckoning long overdue. The silence of the Onyx Estates mansion, when Julian finally returned from his investors' dinner well past midnight, screamed louder than any accusation. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, a stark contrast to the usual low hum of activity, the discreet footsteps of the staff, the faint strains of classical music he preferred, Elara's soft laughter echoing from the conservatory. He strode into the grand foyer, a familiar arrogance in his step, shrugging off his bespoke tuxedo jacket. "Elara," he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I'm home, darling." Only the oppressive silence answered him. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. She was probably asleep, sulking perhaps after their earlier disagreement. He'd smooth it over in the morning. A new piece of jewelry, a weekend trip to Paris. She'd come around. They always did. He poured himself a generous measure of aged whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the massive chandelier. He took a slow sip, savoring the burn. He was Julian Thorne. Women didn't leave him. They clung to him, desperate for his attention, his favor, his wealth. Elara was no different. She was emotional, yes, especially now with the pregnancy. But leave him? Unthinkable. A childish tantrum, nothing more. But as he ascended the sweeping marble staircase to their master suite, a sliver of unease began to penetrate his self-assurance. The bedroom was dark, empty. Her side of the vast custom-made bed was undisturbed, the silk sheets smooth and cold. And then he saw it. A single sheet of their heavy, cream-colored Onyx Estate stationery lying starkly on the pristine white duvet, his name scrawled across it in Elara's elegant script. Beside it, glinting malevolently in the dim light filtering in from the hallway, was her wedding ring. The 10-carat diamond, a symbol of his possession, now looked like a discarded bauble. His arrogance dissolved, replaced by a wave of chilling confusion, then a surge of raw, unadulterated panic. He snatched up the note, his hand surprisingly unsteady. "Julian," it read, "the illusion is shattered. I choose truth, for myself and for Leo. You'll understand when the ravens come home to roost." Ravens. The word leaped out at him, cold and sharp. When the ravens come home to roost. It echoed Seraphina's earlier, ominous text. The ravens always collect their due. What in God's name did Elara know about the ravens? How could she? This was a secret he had guarded ferociously, a dark undercurrent to his glittering empire, a legacy he had inherited and desperately tried to control. He stumbled through the mansion, a dawning horror in his eyes. Her closet, usually overflowing with couture gowns and designer shoes, was partially empty. Key pieces were gone. Her toiletries, her favorite books, the small, framed photograph of her late parents she always kept on her nightstand. All vanished. It was a calculated departure, not an impulsive flight of fancy. She had truly left him. The carefully constructed world of Julian Thorne began to implode. He made frantic calls, his voice, usually so commanding, now laced with a desperate edge. Elara's phone went straight to voicemail, a new anonymous recording. Her parents, when he finally reached them in sleepy Port Sterling, claimed to know nothing, their voices cold and distant. Her closest friends, those few he knew by name, were equally unhelpful, their polite denials barely concealing their contempt. He even tried her obstetrician, the kindly Dr. Evelyn Hayes, who informed him with icy professionalism that she was bound by patient confidentiality. His business dealings, already strained by his increasingly erratic behavior and the subtle, insidious pressures from Seraphina's associates, began to falter. Multi-million-dollar deals teetered on the brink of collapse as Julian, distracted and consumed by Elara's disappearance, missed crucial meetings, snapped at his board members, and made irrational decisions. His staff, once so deferential, now exchanged worried glances, whispering about the cracks appearing in the Thorne empire. He was alienating everyone, his legendary Midas touch turning to ash. In a fit of rage and desperation, he confronted Chloe Asher, Elara's fiercely loyal best friend. He found her at her small, independent art gallery in a trendy downtown district. "Where is she, Chloe?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "Tell me where Elara is, or I swear I'll—" Chloe, unintimidated, met his fury with a steely calm. "Or you'll what, Julian?" she countered, her eyes like chips of ice. "Ruin me, like you've ruined everything else you touch? Elara's where you can't hurt her anymore. She's finally chosen peace over your gilded poison. And perhaps," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a subtle, knowing glint in her eyes, "she's finally escaped the shadows you brought into her life, the ones that whisper about ravens and debts." His blood ran cold. How much did Chloe know? Defeated and increasingly unnerved, Julian returned to the echoing emptiness of Onyx Estates. And there, as if summoned by his despair, was Seraphina Dubois. She was lounging on one of his priceless antique sofas, a glass of his best champagne in her hand, looking as if she owned the place. "Trouble in paradise, Julian?" she purred, her voice a silken caress that now made his skin crawl. She offered cold comfort, her eyes glittering with an unholy amusement. She spoke of new opportunities, of expanding their mutual interests, of the power they could consolidate now that the distraction of his naive little wife was gone. But Julian, finally seeing the true extent of the destruction around him, the utter desolation of his life without Elara, recoiled. The adrenaline rush of her dangerous allure, the thrill of their illicit encounters, had turned to bile in his throat. "It's over, Seraphina," he said, his voice hoarse. "Get out. I want nothing more to do with you, or your games." Seraphina's amusement hardened into something cold and dangerous. She rose slowly, gracefully, like a panther. "Oh, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "you still don't understand, do you? The game isn't over. It's only just begun." She paused at the doorway, her eyes, black as polished jet, boring into his. "And the ravens," she added, her voice a chilling whisper that would haunt his nightmares, "are always watching." With that, she was gone, leaving him in the suffocating silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical blow. Utterly broken, haunted by Seraphina's parting shot and the terrifying implications of Elara's note, Julian Thorne, the man who had everything, realized he had nothing. The empire he had built felt like a house of cards, teetering on the brink of collapse. The fear, cold and sharp, was a new sensation, and it terrified him. As a last resort, a desperate clutching at straws, he found the card of Dr. Lena Hansen, a renowned therapist whose name had been discreetly passed to him months ago by a concerned board member. His hands trembled as he dialed the number. The king was dethroned, his palace a hollow shell, his only remaining companion a gnawing, all-consuming despair. Across the city, under a different sky, Elara was taking her first breaths of precarious freedom, while Julian, miles away, finally admitted to a stranger's voice on the phone, I need help. I've destroyed everything, and I think I'm in danger." Having traded the glittering, sharp-edged cage of Aurelia City for the hushed anonymity of Willow Creek Crossing, Clara Hayes shed her old skin to become Nina Foster. It was more than just a new name, it was a desperate bid for a future, a fragile sanctuary carved out in a tiny sun-dappled rented cottage. Yet the past clung to her like a shadow, a chilling whisper that refused to be silenced, its presence now disturbingly echoed by a mysterious locked box she couldn't for the life of her explain. This quaint cottage, nestled at the end of a quiet lane, was meant to be her haven, a place where the diamond-edged cruelty of Marcus Thorne and his world couldn't reach her. Her days in Willow Creek Crossing settled into a quiet, if anxious, rhythm. Each morning, Nina would walk along the deuced paths of the local park, the burgeoning life within her, a constant, precious reminder of why she'd fled. The fear of discovery was a knot in her stomach, a cold companion on her solitary strolls, yet with each passing day, a fragile sense of independence began to bloom. Prenatal checkups with Dr. Eleanor Vance, a kind, no-nonsense local physician whose calm demeanor was a balm to Nina's frayed nerves, became milestones in this new, uncertain life. "You're doing wonderfully, Nina," Dr. Vance would say, her smile genuine, though a flicker of unspoken questions often lingered in her eyes. Nina knew the doctor likely sensed she was running from something, but true to her professionalism, she never pried. Her lifeline to the world she'd abandoned, and the resources she needed to survive, remained Maya Benton. Maya, ever practical and fiercely loyal, had been the architect of this escape. It was Maya who had found the cottage, Maya, who had arranged the initial funds, and Maya, who now called regularly, her voice a steady anchor in Nina's swirling sea of anxieties. "How are you holding up, really?" Maya would ask, cutting through Nina's practiced assurances. "And Liam? Is he kicking up a storm yet?" On Maya's strong recommendation, Nina consulted Miss Olivia Thornton, a discreet and empathetic family lawyer whose office was tucked away in a neighboring town. Miss Thornton, a woman with a reputation for handling sensitive cases with both steel and silk, listened patiently as Nina recounted her fractured story, omitting the darkest, most unbelievable parts but painting a clear picture of her need for protection. "Legally, Nina," Miss Thornton began, her gaze direct but kind, "we have options regarding a divorce from Mr. Thorne, and eventually establishing custody for Liam. However," she paused, leaning forward slightly, "our immediate priority must be your safety and the well-being of your child. We need to ensure you remain untraceable, at least for now. Let the dust settle. Focus on your health." The lawyer's words, while sobering, offered a sliver of control. There was a path, however thorny. Nina dedicated herself to preparing for Liam's arrival with a quiet fervor. The small spare room was slowly transforming into a nursery, filled with soft blankets and second-hand treasures Maya had managed to procure. She started a journal, a place to pour out the torrent of emotions that often threatened to overwhelm her. The lingering trauma of Marcus's deceptions, the tendrils of fear that snaked around her heart in the dead of night, but also, crucially, her burgeoning hopes for Liam. She wrote to him of the peaceful world she yearned to give him, a world starkly different from the gilded cage she had escaped. "I want you to know kindness, my little one," she penned one evening, tears blurring the ink. "Real kindness and strength, the strength to choose your own path." One cool afternoon, Nina was sorting through the few boxes of belongings Maya had managed to retrieve from a storage unit, items Nina had squirreled away long before her escape. Most were mundane, old books, some clothes, a few sentimental trinkets, but then, tucked beneath a pile of old university textbooks, her fingers brushed against wood. She pulled it out. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, dark and old, its surface covered in swirling, unfamiliar patterns. It was securely locked with a small, tarnished brass clasp. A chill, quite separate from the room's temperature, prickled her skin as she turned it over in her hands. It felt strangely cold to the touch, heavy. She had no memory of ever seeing it before, certainly not packing it. Where had it come from? She jiggled the lock, then searched fruitlessly for a key amongst her other things. It was sealed tight. The box, unassuming yet palpably out of place, became a new focal point for her simmering anxiety, a fresh wellspring of intense, almost unnerving curiosity. It was another unexplained fragment, seemingly from her life with Marcus, yet entirely alien to her. What secrets did this silent, cold container hold? Was it, her mind whispered with a sudden, icy dread, somehow connected to the unsettling occurrences back in Aurelia City, to the whispers about Morwenna, to the chilling symbolism of the ravens that had haunted her final months there? Days turned into a week, the box sitting on her bedside table, a silent, locked enigma. Nina found her gaze drawn to it constantly. As the late autumn sun cast long shadows across her small living room, Nina, now heavily pregnant, sat by the window, the carved wooden box resting on the sill before her. Her fingers traced its intricate designs, the coldness seeping into her skin. A flutter of movement outside caught her eye. Her breath hitched. A raven, large and glossy black, had landed on the weathered fence bordering her small garden. It wasn't just perched, its head was cocked, its obsidian eye fixed directly on her, an unblinking, intelligent stare. A profound sense of unease, sharp and familiar, prickled her skin, the fragile walls of her sanctuary suddenly feeling paper-thin. The bird, the box, what did it all mean? And was this quiet haven truly safe, or had a piece of the nightmare followed her here? The air grew heavy with unspoken questions, the silence of the cottage pressing in, amplifying the raven's silent, knowing vigil. The raven's unsettling vigil outside Nina's window was an omen she couldn't shake, a dark thread mirroring the unraveling of Marcus Thorne's carefully constructed world, miles away. For him, Dr. Evelyn Reed's serene office had become a battleground for his very soul. Week after week, he was stripped bare. The layers of arrogance and charm peeled back to reveal the raw, festering wounds beneath. But the most explosive revelation of this painful journey was not destined to be found in the measured cadence of therapeutic discourse, but in the sudden, undeniable crisis of new life-threatening and untimely arrival. In those grueling sessions, Marcus confronted the hollow man he had become. Dr. Reed, with her calm persistence, chipped away at his defenses. "Why, Marcus?" she would press, her gaze unwavering. "Why the insatiable need for control, for adulation? What void were you trying to fill with your ambition, your entanglements?" He was forced to stare into the abyss of his narcissism, the gnawing fear of inadequacy he'd masked for so long with a veneer of cold superiority. The emptiness that had driven him to betray Nina, to build an empire on shifting sands, was laid bare. And then there was Morwenna, and the chilling whispers of the Raven network, a shadowy connection, perhaps a dangerous legacy from his family, or a perilous allegiance he'd forged in his ruthless climb that Dr. Reed insisted he explore. The Ravens weren't just birds, they represented something far more sinister, a web he was caught in, one that had undoubtedly contributed to the darkness that consumed his marriage. The full extent of it still eluded him, or perhaps he was still too afraid to fully admit it even to himself. During this agonizing period of self-discovery, a sliver of information reached Marcus through a former associate, a man of questionable loyalties but still possessing a lingering, perhaps misplaced sense of allegiance to the powerful Marcus Thorne of old. The contact, his voice a low murmur over a burner phone, revealed that Nina, or someone fitting her description, heavily pregnant, was believed to be in the general vicinity of Willow Creek Crossing. Not an exact address, no new name, just a general area. It was a breadcrumb, but for Marcus it was a lifeline. He confessed this to Dr. Reed, not with triumph, but with a desperation that was achingly raw. "I know where she might be," he choked out, the words tumbling over each other. "Not exactly, but I need to see her, Evelyn, not the old me. I just want to tell her I'm sorry for Liam, our son. He deserves better." Dr. Reed observed him, her expression carefully neutral. She saw the flicker, though, a spark of genuine remorse, a humility he'd never possessed before. Ethically, her path was a razor's edge. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I cannot directly facilitate you finding her if she wishes to remain hidden. However, if she has legal representation, I could, perhaps, reach out to them on your behalf. Offer a mediated session. Here, in a neutral space." And so the message traveled. Dr. Reed to Miss Olivia Thornton, Miss Thornton to a wary, conflicted Nina. The request for a single, mediated joint session threw Nina into turmoil. Could she face him? Did she even want to? The wounds were still so fresh, the image of the Raven at her window a constant, disquieting presence, a reminder of forces she didn't understand, possibly linked to Marcus. Yet, for Liam, for the chance, however slim, that her son might one day know a father who had truly sought to change, she found herself whispering a hesitant yes. The unopened, intricately carved wooden box in her cottage seemed to pulse with its own silent judgment of her decision. The appointed day found them at Dr. Reed's tranquil office suite in Willow Creek Gardens, a place Nina had never been, miles from her little cottage. The air in the room was thick with unspoken history, with pain and a fragile, almost unbearable tension. Marcus looked different. Gaunt, weary, the polished arrogance replaced by a haunted uncertainty. He sat opposite her, Dr. Reed a calm presence between them. He spoke first, his voice low, stripped of its usual theatricality. "Nina?" "Clara," he corrected himself, his eyes filled with a deep, aching regret. "There are no words, no excuses for what I did. The man I was, he was a monster. I was terrified of failing, of not being enough, and I destroyed everything that mattered in the process. I am so sorry." Nina listened, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, her face a mask of careful neutrality. She saw the change in his demeanor, the absence of blame-shifting, of manipulative charm. It was unnerving. Could this be real? A part of her, the part that still remembered the man she'd once loved, yearned to believe. But the larger, wounded part remained barricaded. Just as a fragile, tentative moment of something akin to understanding seemed to hover in the air, a silent acknowledgement of his pain meeting hers, Nina gasped. A sharp, undeniable pain shot through her, stealing her breath. She clutched her belly, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Oh no," she whispered, another wave of agony contorting her features. It's It's too early. I'm only 36 weeks. Panic erupted. Dr. Reed was instantly on her feet, her professional calm kicking in. Marcus, call for an ambulance. Nina, breathe with me. Marcus sat frozen for a split second, his face a canvas of shock and fear. Then instinct took over. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking, his earlier apology, the delicate dance of reconciliation, all shattered by the raw, primal urgency of the moment. As Nina cried out, a low, keening sound of pain and terror, he scrambled to make the call. The carefully constructed therapy session dissolving into chaos. The fate of their fragile, barely there connection, Nina's carefully guarded secrets, and the mystery of the still unopened box back in her quiet cottage, all hung precariously in the balance, overshadowed by the immediate, overwhelming reality of their child's imminent and dangerously premature arrival. The real labor, it seemed, was only just beginning. The chaotic end to the therapy session bled into a frantic, siren-screaming journey. Marcus, his face a mask of terror and adrenaline, somehow managed to get Nina into his car, Dr. Reed's urgent instructions echoing in his ears as he raced towards Hopewell Medical Center. The real labor, indeed, had just begun. And amidst the sterile urgency of the hospital corridors that soon enveloped them, a baby's first, sharp cry would eventually slice through the pervasive tension. A sound that was both a profound ending to one agonizing chapter and the terrifying, uncertain beginning of another. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, fear, and raw, unfiltered emotion. Marcus, surprisingly, was a rock. The shock had stripped him of artifice, leaving behind a man genuinely terrified for Nina and their child. He stayed, a silent, anxious presence in the delivery room, sometimes catching Nina's eye, his own filled with a potent mix of guilt and desperate hope. He didn't dare touch her, unless a nurse prompted him to offer a hand, which Nina, in the throes of labor, sometimes gripped with bruising force, sometimes pushed away. He flinched, but remained. Then, with a final gut-wrenching effort from Nina, and a chorus of encouragement from the medical team, Liam Caspian Thorne arrived, small, wailing, but blessedly, miraculously alive. A wave of fierce, all-consuming love washed over Nina as they placed her son on her chest. He was so tiny, so perfect. Her protective instincts, always strong, surged to an almost unbearable peak. This little life was everything. When a nurse gently cleaned Liam and swaddled him, Marcus was allowed to hold his son for the first time. Tears streamed unchecked down his face as he gazed at the infant in his arms, his large hands trembling. He looked up at Nina, his voice thick and broken. "Nina, he's perfect." He approached her bedside. Liam held reverently. I am so profoundly sorry, Nina, for everything, for the pain, the lies." His gaze was earnest, the sophisticated mask he usually wore entirely absent. "I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your trust, to be the father Liam deserves." He paused, his voice dropping, a new gravity in his tone. "And the ravens? That shadow. I understand more now. I will banish it, for our safety, for his. I promise you." Nina, utterly exhausted, simply watched him, her expression unreadable. His words registered, but her world had narrowed to the tiny, warm bundle that was her son. The future was a vast, terrifying unknown, a path shrouded in mist. Could she ever trust Marcus again? Could he truly protect them from the darkness he now seemed to acknowledge more fully? A few days later, Nina was resting in her private hospital room. Liam slept peacefully in a bassinet beside her bed, a tiny fist curled near his cheek. Marcus had been a quiet, unexpectedly helpful presence, fetching water, speaking in low tones to nurses, his eyes rarely leaving his son or Nina for long. Maya had also been a constant, supportive visitor, her relief palpable, though her glances towards Marcus were still tinged with suspicion. Nina turned her head to look out the window, the city a distant, muted blur. As she watched, a single, glossy black raven feather detached itself from the sky, drifting down, until it landed softly on the outer windowsill. It rested there for a moment, a stark black shape against the pale stone, before a gentle breeze whisked it away, sending it fluttering out of sight. A chill, cold and sharp, traced its way down Nina's spine. It felt like a sign, a message. Her gaze drifted from the window to a corner of the room where Maya had placed a small bag of her essential belongings retrieved from the cottage. Protruding slightly from the bag was the corner of the old, intricately carved wooden box. The box that had appeared so mysteriously. The box that felt like another dark omen. Suddenly, a new resolve, born of maternal fierce protectiveness and a desperate need for answers, hardened within her. She had to know. "Marcus?" Her voice was quiet but firm. He looked up from a pamphlet on newborn care, his expression attentive. "Yes? Your keychain. Do you have one of those little multi-tools on it, the kind with a small pry bar or a sturdy flathead?" A flicker of surprise, then understanding, or perhaps just a willingness to comply with any request. He nodded, pulling his keys from his pocket. "I think so. Why?" "The box," she said, nodding towards her bag. "I need to open it." Marcus found a small, sturdy tool. Nina took it, her hand surprisingly steady. Maya, who had just entered with a cup of tea for Nina, watched with a curious frown as Nina retrieved the cold, dark wooden box. The air in the room seemed to grow still, charged with anticipation. With a determined breath, Nina inserted the edge of the tool into the seam of the lock. It resisted for a moment, then with a sickening little crack, the old brass clasp gave way. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded, deep crimson velvet, lay not jewels, not documents, not anything she could have ever remotely expected. Her breath caught in her throat. There was a small collection of older raven feathers, just like the one at the window, but these were brittle, their edges frayed with age. Beside them lay a tarnished silver locket. With trembling fingers, Nina picked it up. It opened with a faint click. Inside was a miniature, exquisitely painted portrait of a woman with piercing dark eyes and high cheekbones, a woman who looked startlingly, terrifyingly like Morwenna. But the style of dress, the severe hairstyle, suggested an earlier era, decades older perhaps. Beneath the locket was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, a note, handwritten in an elegant spidery script, addressed to "My dearest Marcus." Not her Marcus, surely? This paper was ancient. Her eyes scanned the words, each one a fresh stab of ice in her heart. They watch, they always watch. This legacy of shadows is ours to bear, a debt that must always be paid by our bloodline. You are part of it now, as was your father, and his father before him. Beware the whispers, my son, but never, ever defy the true Queen Raven. Her reach is eternal. It was signed with a single unfamiliar initial, M. Nina's blood ran cold. A horrifying new understanding, or rather a terrifying cascade of new, even darker questions, began to dawn in her eyes. Legacy of shadows? Bloodline debt? Queen Raven? This wasn't just about Marcus's infidelities or even some shadowy business dealings. This was something older, deeper, more insidious. She looked up, her gaze locking with Marcus's, her face pale with shock and a dawning unspeakable dread. "Marcus," she whispered, the note trembling in her hand, "who is M? And what in God's name have you dragged us into?" So that's how the story ends, huh? If you're still here with me right now, dear friends, that says something, that this story in some way touched your heart. Maybe it stirred something familiar, something raw, or even something you hadn't quite faced before. And now, maybe we can take a step back together, not from a place of judgment, but simply from observation. No right, no wrong, just reflection. What does a story like this teach us? Perhaps it's the reminder that trust is a fragile thread, easily frayed by silence and secrecy, or that betrayal, no matter how softly it arrives, can shake the very foundation of love. And yet, as the Stoics often say, the obstacle is the way. What wounds us can also forge us, sharper, wiser, kinder. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." It's not about avoiding the storm, but learning to stand in the middle of it with grace. Like Elara, who in the face of betrayal still carried her dignity, her quiet strength, and the promise of new beginnings within her. So maybe now it's our turn to choose how we carry our own scars. Do we let them harden us, or do we let them remind us of how deeply we can love, how deeply we can rise? If this story moved you, even just a little, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep holding space for stories that reflect the messy, beautiful, painful, healing parts of life. Because in the end, it's in those shared stories that we often find pieces of ourselves. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and most of all, stay open. Drop your thoughts below. I'm listening.